Okay, it looks like Rebecca has turned things on. So we'll end up clipping this out when we actually do the post of everything.
No, we should have all the live via Telstar pregame stuff.
I was going to show you. I got to take one of those out. I was looking through the last couple days of the posts on Galactic Journey, and one of the things I've been doing is trying to go find what I have for the things that you're reviewing, and I came across my copy of this.
Copy
it's
of
3 Against the Witch World. It's actually the edition that you reviewed, or the picture of the edition that you reviewed. Yep, there you go.
All right, let me get this out on Facebook.
Okay.
No promises that this will get anybody, but you never know.
You know, it's all about having the tail. It's about having people show up, having us have a good conversation, and then having people able to continue to experience it. So they get to have the wonderfulness that is our conversation for all eternity.
All eternity.
Or at least as long as the web goes.
That's pretty much all eternity.
That's the plan. That's what all the science fiction books I've read tell me.
I haven't gotten to the web yet.
I'm sure somebody in the 60s was writing about the web and information staying around. And
nope. It was all in the memory banks of UNIVAC. Although there was a very funny story about a library that the index got so huge, and then there was an index for the indices, and then eventually the index collapsed a few thousand years in the future, and no one knew what the original data was. And it's actually a really funny book. It's a pretty funny story. All right, let me share this.
Yeah, it's funny for me because when I left my job as an engineer, I was one of the few people who knew how to retrieve some of the data from the systems that we're using when I started as an engineer. You know, like optical drives on various, there's things. And my dad was a computer programmer who programmed in COBOL and Fortran and all of those things. And I'm sure that the GE could never get the data that he was doing in the 60s as a computer programmer.
Right. Yeah, we have a whole series on programming in the 60s. That's a lot of fun. I'll be right back.
Okay. Look at the ask a question. Okay, let's see. Boom. Ask a question. Ask a question. Does this work? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this question. Yes, I am sure I wish to delete that question. Okay. So we'll be able to see that. Now, Rebecca will be able to see that when somebody asks a question. Will that pop up? Could you try asking a question so I can see what happens? Okay, so it looks like I've got a little red circle there. I can. Yes. Oops. Okay. So if someone asks a question, there's a little red circle comes up on the ask a question at the bottom there. Ooh, Africa Core, I have that. Is that what Avalon Hill was doing in 65?
It sure was. Actually, it came out last year. Right now, the Battle of the Bulges came out, but Janice and I actually just set up a game of Africa Core to play. So,
yeah,
Janice, if you go to my Galactic Journey, you can actually retweet my tweet, and it also has the link.
And you might want to move your camera just a little bit. I'm getting like half your face, Gideon.
Yeah, when the show starts, I'll get in position.
I can't read the cover for the album.
It's Jerry and the Pacemaker's Greatest Hits. It just came out.
Oh.
Yeah, I do have the ability to share screen. So one of the things I can do is this.
Okay. Nice.
So, and I've got all the covers.
Fantastic.
So. Of course, I also have the hard copies too, but
yeah, I have copies. I figured you would have copies. As a matter of fact, let me grab those real quick.
So you have buy the book. I assume that goes to the author page you set up. Oh.
Get my festive Jack Advance out of the way. There we go. Okay. So there. It's weird seeing it backwards. There. I wonder if there's a way I can reverse this. I think it's coming up backwards for the reading. I should know how to flip the phone or flip the. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It looks backwards to me, but that's fine. Oh, there we go. I can see Jerry and the Pacemakers now.
If you go to my Twitter, you can see the link to Lucky Charms does have red.
Okay.
Bye.
Give that to me.
That's closer.
Just a little bit. There we go.
Oh, we got polls. That's cool.
Yeah, we got polls. There's a.
I see polls.
Where are you joining us from? Yeah, we're asking where people are from. Okay.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, actually, you know what? Put this. What am I seeing back there? I'm seeing this.
2 minutes.
There, so it's on camera. Okay, we've got some people here.
I can hear what's going on.
You should be able to hear us. We're talking.
Yeah.
Oh, Janice says the event has started. There are people watching us right now.
Okay, so if we're going to do that, I should probably go ahead and do an introduction, and we'll get
pants
started.
on, Bruce.
I don't have pants on, so I don't have to.
Neither do I.
So hello to everyone, and welcome to Rediscovered Books here in beautiful downtown Boise, Idaho. Tonight, we are pleased to host Gideon Marcus in conversation. Normally, we'd be hosting Gideon here in the store, and you'd be sitting in our science fiction section that you can kind of see behind me. But with the restrictions that we have, and the fact that this is a science fiction themed event, we thought being on the internet would be fantastic. This is also our first experience with Crowdcast, so we're pleased to have us all be guinea pigs. Gideon Marcus is an award-winning science fiction author, science fiction historian, founder of the 3 times Hugo nominated, including this year's nomination, site Galactic Journey, a portal to science fiction and science 55 years ago. His newest endeavor is Journey Press, which has produced Rediscovery, this lovely volume that I have in my hand right here, Science Fiction by Women, 1958 to 1963, and his new YA space adventure, Ketra. No, I'm not going to wait till 7. So, as always, we here at Rediscovered Books are able to bring you events like this crowdcast because you support us in the bookstore and support the authors whose works are on our shelves. If you're interested in reading Gideon's new book or other books by Gideon Press, you can buy them at Rediscovered Books. We are open for shopping by appointment, or you can buy them on our website. If you are not lucky enough to live here in Boise, there is a link in the show notes to a curated list of both Gideon's books and some books that are current for Gideon 55 years ago or important in the science fiction community of that time that we may be discussing over the course of the evening. I'd like to remind you, without writers like Gideon and people like you who are watching this crowdcast and who make up our science fiction reading community, stores like Rediscovered Books and stores like Rediscovered Books across the country could not exist. So Gideon, thank you so much for being with us. And if you are watching us on the internet, either live or as a recording, thank you so much for being here as well. Gideon, thank you. It's lovely to see you. I've gotten to talk to you a couple of times, but this is the first time we've actually interacted this way. And I kind of wanted to kick things off with the new book. And as we had discussed a little earlier, when I was reading it, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
I was hearkened back to my time as a young man reading the classic juveniles, things like Isaac Asimov's juvenile series, the Heinlein juveniles, and I feel that you've really gone out of your way to capture that flavor while updating it to a modern audience. So what kicked this idea off though for you? Where did this come from?
So, like you, I'm 39, like Jack Benny,
and I have been for many years.
right, celebrating our umpteenth anniversary of our 39th birthdays.
I have revisions.
So I grew up on, as you say, all these great science fiction stories designed to introduce people to the genre. And what was great about them was they didn't talk down to their audience. They were accessible to all ages, but they were aimed at children or young adults. They weren't called young adults back then. They were called teenagers. And there's a whole genre of YA today. But they tend not to focus on the things that I want to see. I enjoyed Harry Potter. I enjoyed Hunger Games. But that seems to be the mold that we've been kind of stuck in for the most part for the last 20 years. And I wanted to go back to where space was the final frontier. I wanted a positive, hopeful book, not a dystopia. There's no villains in my book. There'll never be any villains per se. There may be bad people or misguided people, but it's never going to be one person fighting the tyranny. And I've got a diverse cast of characters because that's what I wanted to see. I've got Ketra is a queer person of color because that's what I wanted to read about. And they say, write what you know. So of course she's queer.
And one of the things I really appreciated that, because as I was reading those books when I was young, I could see myself in those young, plucky heroes that were going off. But I had friends who didn't see themselves. I had friends who were African-American, friends who were queer, and they didn't see themselves in that same way. And it's one of the things I love about modern YA is you can see the variety of people. And there's no reason science fiction shouldn't have that variety.
Well, it's interesting because this variety's been around for a while, but we've kind of been unaware of it. So the next book we're coming out with is called I Want the Stars. and it actually came out in 1964 by Tom Purdom. I'm going to show this to you now. Can you see that?
Yes. Cool.
So Tom's actually a friend of mine. He's also a Hugo finalist and a great writer, and he's still producing stuff for the big magazines even after all these years. But I found him in the course of doing Galactic Journey when his book looked like this.
And one of the ace doubles.
Right. Yeah. And it may be the first, I believe it's the first time that there was ever a person of color protagonist for a science fiction book. That's not the only thing that drew me to it. It's actually another great story of hope. This is also the time where Chip Delaney, Samuel R. Delaney, is really coming onto the scene in a big way. He just explodes with his first books. He's come out with, I think, 4 so far. And he's just really good, really interesting. Again, diverse cast, but also just sort of interesting, complex worlds. And most of his career is still ahead of him. And he's the first Black science fiction author. I mean, there was at least one other who had written a story, but in terms of making it his career, he was the first. And he did it in a big way. And I'm not sure how long it took for people to know what his ethnicity was, because I don't think they were releasing pictures with his early books.
I don't think so. And that's something that I notice even on some more modern things is the author picture is often not on a first or second book. And you never know what that person's background is, what their ethnicity is, unless they say something about it. And I enjoy that. I don't want
avoid putting my picture on books because I'm told I have a great face for radio.
But getting back to your book, one of the things that I liked about it was the problem solving aspects that the characters go through and the cooperation they do. So why did you decide to have that kind of ensemble cast?
Well, life is an ensemble. Nobody does things alone. I think one of the biggest lessons Keitra learns along the way is that she has to depend on her friends, and teamwork is important. And gosh, what a great message for today. When I planned a March release date for Keitra, I did not expect to be launching it into the teeth of a global pandemic, nor into the civil strife we're having right now. I get asked sometimes why I chose 55 years ago for Galactic Journey, which is my day-by-day blog through science fiction and the space race in the persona of someone living back then. And the answer is, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And there's a fascinating synchronicity between 1965 and today. I just yesterday I pointed out that in 1965 the president was telling the states that if they did not allow the citizens to protest, he would send the National Guard to ensure that they could protest. So how is that for a contrast to what we're experiencing in 2020?
And if you were a year or two ahead, if you chose to say 53 or 52 years, you'd be covering the Watts riots and things like that.
Watts riots is this summer. Watts riot is happening in 2 months.
So that does give us a nice segue into your day jobs. I really do love reading Galactic Journey. It's unique. It's interesting. Could you give us a little bit of the story about how it came about?
I inherited a giant pile of science fiction magazines when my father passed away many, many decades ago. And I decided I wanted some motivation to read them. So I had enough of them starting about 1953 to read them month by month as they came out. And that way I'd stick to a schedule every month. And then it got under my skin. So you're reading these books and they're all talking about the same movies, the same political events. They're all anticipating the first satellite. They're talking about President Eisenhower. So I started listening to the music. I built an AM broadcaster so I could listen to the music live. And by the way, it's still going.
So is there a place on the
This-
internet you can tune into this? So
Yes, you can actually tune to it. If you go to Galactic Journey, there's a little link on the left where you can click, and yes, you can listen along with me. So I made this stage, but back then it was 53, right? So we were listening to overripe swing music and schmaltzy stuff and Dean Martin, and then rock and roll just came out and blew everyone's minds. If you could tune into the black stations, of course, because the white stations didn't play it until Elvis and Pat Boone covered them for white sensibilities. And it just got good to me, and I started it was sort of a thing that I did. I zoned into this other world. And in 1958, or to you 2013, my wife asked me, "Hey, would you refer some of your favorite stories?" And I said, "You know what? I'll do a little blog, and I'll get 2 or 3 readers." And then, so here I am, 3 Hugo nominations and a Serling Award later, and we have 20 people writing for us, and it's this huge behemoth. But it all started out because I wanted to read these magazines. But the real thing is, when we started it, it became sort of this activist platform too, because I kept finding that I wanted to read stories by women, because it tended to be when the stories were written by women, when you could tell it was a woman writing, because often it was by initials or pseudonyms. The stories were the best, or at least among the best. The quality tended to be higher. For whatever reason that is, there were plenty of barriers to being published if you were a woman, some explicit and some implicit. And so we started to spotlight women writers, and then we started to spotlight other marginalized voices, the queer voices, the persons of color. And then you can't enjoy an age, you can't understand an age in context without the larger picture. So we started covering the space shots, because I'm a professional space historian. I got a fashion columnist, because that was really important to me. We cover the music. In a couple of days, I'm going to write an article on the 1964-65 TV season. So it's going to be, it's like jumping into the past. There's something for everybody. So that's how Galactic Journey came about.
And so I noticed behind you, you've got record albums, and I'm a gamer, and so we were talking before we kind of went live that I actually have a copy of Africa Core and have played it. How many of these things do you go out and seek to find to enhance this experience of having these magazines?
Well, I'm always looking. In fact, the other day I put out a plea to my list saying, "Hey, if you have any technology which is old to you, I would like to keep it to make sure that it gets preserved, because people are throwing this stuff away all the time." I've started cataloging all of our artifacts. At Galactic Journey, there's actually a museum. And every week or so, I will put up a new item in the museum, and eventually there's going to be dozens of them. And I've just been collecting them for decades. And I would love to someday have a microcomputing museum where people could hands-on play with these things. But for now, it's all going to be virtual.
If you ever want to put it up in a museum as a picture, I have a teaching slide rule.
Oh, fantastic.
That I was explaining to my kids about what it was like to do things before calculators, because I'm on that generation that we were at the beginning of the 4-function calculators and the end of slide rules. And so I still have a slide rule and my dad's circular slide rules. And one of the things that my wife got me for my birthday one year was a 6-foot teaching slide rule that now hangs on the wall in my house.
Yeah, mine's only a foot long, so I have slide rule envy.
So again, this nice segue. I loved I loved the Rediscovery collection. I got it. I saw it when it was. I think there was something on it in Publishers Weekly, and I went out and got a copy, and then it's what led me to you. And you say in here, and I've noticed reading it, that some of these great stories, or the best stories, were stories by women. Who are the women that you're excited about us discovering as authors who aren't in this collection?
Who aren't in this collection?
Yeah.
Who aren't in this collection? It's a tricky question, because of course I'm very partial to the ones in the collection.
Well, let me rephrase the question.
But I'm happy to talk about others too.
Yeah. No, who in the collection that we have one story from should we be tracking down more stories from?
Well, possibly the biggest unsung heroine is Roselle George Brown, because she just exploded on the scene in the late 50s, wrote tons of great stuff, invented the cigarette smoking galactic woman space cop, and then died in 1967 at age 41 due to leukemia, and that was just tragic. And I happen to be friends with her son, and we're going to reprint one of her books. And I just love her stuff. She's just really good, and she's just got this sardonic wit to her. She did this great book with Keith Laumer called Earthblood. People who were not in the, interestingly enough, Ursula K. Le Guin is not in there, though she had just started writing in that era, and she exploded out of the gate with a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
Anne McCaffrey was someone who was current back then, but I really wanted to get the authors that people were not familiar with. However, if you want to know who I recommend, if you go to Galactic Journey, I've got a series called The Second Sex in SFF. And you can get there by going to Galactic Journey and then just searching Second Sex, or going galacticjourney.org/tag/second-sex. And I've done 6 entries with 6 female authors. The latest one I covered had J. Hunter Hawley in it, who did a whole bunch of like action sort of science fiction novels. She hardly was in the magazines. I think the first story I saw her in a magazine was actually last month. And nobody knew she was a woman. Her first name was Joan, but she wrote a bunch of books. Let's see who's good ones. Madeleine L'Engle, of course, is famous today for doing A Wrinkle in Time. And while her book did not get nominated for a Hugo, we nominated it for the Galactic Star when it came out in 1963. Karen Anderson's a good one. She's not in Rediscovery, but she's a great. She's the wife of Poul Anderson. She's a science fiction writer and poet in her own right. And her daughter, Astrid, is still around and writing. A name that is in the book, but nobody knew she was a woman at the time, is Sonia Dorman, and her The Putman Tradition, which is in Rediscovery, is one of my favorite stories.
Are there
Mildred
going to
Klingerman, that's a good one.
Are there going to be more rediscoveries as time moves on? So is there going to be like a 64 to 66? What are your plans for that?
So the plan is we're going to cover 30 years, probably 6 years per book. Counterintuitively, the next book we do will probably be 1952 to 57, or 53 to 57, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 52 to 57, because that's an era I know well. And then the one after that will be 64 to 69. And I'll release that 55 years after 1969. And I will probably do that alternating thing. Eventually, I'd like to cover from the late 40s to the late 70s.
Okay.
There are not many anthologies of women's science fiction, and those that do exist tend to be broad in scope and somewhat shallow in choice. Not all. There's one that's recent. I can't remember the name, but it's pretty eclectic in its choice. But for the most part, their names you know. And I really wanted to be able to answer when people say, "Were women writing science fiction before Ursula K. Le Guin?" Yes. Dozens, and writing really good stuff.
And I have to say, I was very impressed with your selections, because as a science fiction fan for a long time, 39 plus years, there were names I'd never heard of. And it's always a pleasure to discover a new author who's writing great stories. And it's one of the pleasures of what I get to do is I get to be the person who gets sent all the books from Tor and Bain and everything. Oh, we want you to talk about this person or that person. But we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's nice to remember that there are more giants than just Asimov and Heinlein.
I'm trying to see if Pauline Ashwell's Unwillingly to Earth is available via Kobo. Because if you can carry that has all of her stories. The first story is in our volume, and it'd be great if people picked it up for that. And that's a story that was a Hugo finalist, and it's just a fantastic story. No, It does not exist.
Well, and that's something else I have on my list of questions. So this is maybe perhaps a good time to talk about it. I'd asked you to send me a list of authors that you thought were interesting, and one of the things for me going through that list was trying to put a list together for people to be able to purchase the physical copies of the books. And there were certain of them, like the Harry Harrison's Death World, that is not really in print in a good edition anymore, versus something like Niven's World of Ptabs, which is in it, or it's actually totally out of print. And some of the books that you sent me are in print, but from publishers who specialize in going through and finding older books and bringing them back.
So World of Ptabs is out of print, really?
It's available in an audiobook.
That's crazy, because Larry Niven's still around.
But it's not available in a physical edition that I could find. If I wanted to bring it into my bookstore and put it in people's hands right now, I can't do that.
That's crazy. I should write him and ask him if he wants Journey Press to do it.
And that brings me to Journey Press. As you find more of these things like Death World, are you interested in bringing things like that in? Or are you going to what's your future plan look like for Journey?
So Journey Press, we're going to have a few different specific lines. So one, of course, I'm going to keep doing the Keetra series under that imprint. I'm going to keep doing the Rediscovery Anthology series. My wife has an amazing book coming out at the end of the year called, the working title is The Eighth Key, and it is a high fantasy gay romance.
I'd read that.
Yeah, right, and it's fantastic. She has a novella coming out in just a week or two, actually. Again, I think the working title is First Contact, and it's another one of those ridiculously timely stories. You'll know when you see it. That comes out really shortly. We just got amazing cover art for it. But and next year, I'm going to start finding new authors, new voices, because there's just not that many outlets anymore, and there's fewer every day because traditional publishing is falling over itself because of the crisis right now. We are in the luxury that we can survive as long as we need to, although it helps if you buy our books.
And again, we don't want to say this too often, but people like Gideon can have this as their profession when you support them by buying their books.
And it also supports the bookstore too, which is why I'm here and not, meeting with Jeff Bezos as I usually do on the A word. But as for the other thing that we do, our other main line is going to be reprints of amazing stuff that doesn't exist anymore. So it started with I Want the Stars, which I fell into almost by accident. I just happened to be talking to Tom in connection with the Journey because I wanted some firsthand knowledge on his stuff. And I said, hey, would you like me to reprint this? And I mean, I don't know how much it'll make. I don't know what the response will be. And now, of course, it's right in the middle of the coronavirus. But he said, yeah, that sounds like fun. And I knew Robin Brown, and I said, hey, can we redo Galactic Sybil Sue Blue? He said yes. I'm hoping that I can work with the Lammer estate to get Earthblood out.
That'd be lovely.
But I don't know yet, so no promises. And so, yeah, as the journey goes along, as I find books that need to come back, Zena Henderson's The People stuff, I know somebody has the rights to it, but it hasn't been in print for years and years, and that's such a shame because those works are not only timeless, but amazing.
And some of these things surprise me. I was tracking down a copy of Cordwainer Smith's books for somebody, and those are all out of print. And it's one of the reasons why we do new and used books in the store, because I can't imagine not being able to hand somebody Kenneth Robeson's Doc Savage books or Cordwainer Smith, or imagine being someone who can introduce someone to Jack Vance.
Right.
And to do that,
who in 1961 came out with a book called The Dragon Masters. And if Anne McCaffrey didn't get some even unconscious motivation for the Pern series from it, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between this book and her books. Again, not accusing anyone of anything. It's it's the zeitgeist. It's everybody breathes each other's air. but boy, are there similarities. But yeah, I would love to do a version of Cordwainer Smith's The Boy Who Bought Old Earth, linked up for the first time. It's never been done before with the Store of Heart's Desires, which is basically the last half of a book. They've never been put together. And together they make one of the most amazing books of Cordwainer Smith's career. But they were spread across 2 magazines over several months, and no one's ever put them together into a single book.
So as a publisher, how do you go about finding the rights and getting the right to publish these things? It's a question I think no one really talks about, that someone owns the right to publish these stories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm helped a little bit. I used to run a law firm. I'm not an attorney, but I have some familiarity with law. So that's and I have a great team that knows their copyright stuff. I've done a lot of panels at conventions on copyright and the public domain. Some things are in the public domain, especially if it was before 1964. But generally, you have to find the heirs, and or a company owns the rights. The heirs have sold the rights. Sometimes the companies have the rights, and the contracts are not fair to whoever sold them the rights, and that's business. One of the reasons we founded Journey Press is I wanted to make sure that we were not one of the predatory publishers, that we offered our authors good deals, because it's about the authors. They create the content, and I'm not going to give a contract to an author that I would not be happy to do.
That's fantastic.
As an author,
because we deal with a lot of local authors and people coming in, you know, who are trying to figure out how to be out there in the written physical world. You know, yes, ebooks are a huge thing, but there's something about being able to walk into a bookstore and seeing your book on somebody's shelves that's a special experience for an author. On a slightly different note, you're an historian, and you deal with the past as well as the present. How do you feel that today's science fiction fan interacts with the past? I mean,
I don't think they do. I think that most people are not particularly aware or even particularly interested in what has come before. And I think that's kind of sad, but I think you can see that in the fact that so few books from 55 years ago exist today. And I know you can be a cynic and say, well, you know, that stuff is old. There's plenty of people say nothing written before 1980 is readable today, which is obviously silly. I would hate to think that in 55 years, people are saying N.K. Jemisin. Oh my God, that stuff is so old and out of date. And just
I just reread Foundation about 2 weeks ago. As part of the coronavirus for me has been going back and reading things that I love and that have been important to me. And I find it's actually more readable now than it was the first time I read it 40 years ago.
Interesting.
I have more life experience. The things in it make more sense to me than they necessarily did.
Which is funny because Isaac Asimov was very young when he wrote it.
Yeah. But I find I constantly going back to authors from my collection. It's one of the reasons I haunt used bookstores other than my used bookstore is, you know, being able to find something on the shelves and say, I don't have a copy. Oops. I don't have a copy of this book by Paul Anderson. You know, I've got 3 Hearts and 3 Lions and maybe 2 or 3 copies of it, but here's a Paul Anderson book I've never heard of even, and what a great thing to find on the shelf. And there were a couple of books on your list that I don't know if you looked at the bookshop list or not that I put up, but I made comments, and there were a couple that I hadn't read that now I have to add to my to-be-read list.
Good.
So for people out there, if you want to ask questions either to me or more likely to Gideon, there's an ask a question button down at the bottom. You're welcome to ask anything that you're interested in. So what are you reading right now, Gideon?
I just finished a really lousy ace double, actually. because I have to read everything. Luckily, I've got people who work with me, and so sometimes they take the bullet. But right now, I read this. This is by a first-time author. If he had sent this manuscript to Journey Press, I would have sent him a form thank you. And then this was originally The Programmed People in Amazing by Jack Sharkey, who is one of the most consistently not good science fiction authors, though he occasionally surprises. So this is possibly the worst ace double I have ever read in my life. And that's funny because I've read a lot of good ace doubles. I mean, that's where I found I Want the Stars. It's where I discovered Chip Delaney. But you just never know.
We're always happy when a box comes into the used bookstore and open up and you see those ace doubles. It's like, I know there's going to be great stuff. But I have to go through them to see what's not in my collection first before things go out to the shelf.
Well, Ted Sturgeon said it right. He said, 10%, 90% of science fiction is crap, but then 90% of everything
is crap. Yeah. So I have a little bit of I don't know, possibly odd question for you. So you've got this magazine collection. Are you continuing to collect the things from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s so that in 20 years you'll have 55 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. When you see the collection of old 8-bit computers that I have, I mean, I am running a museum as we speak. I have an account to the CDC 6500 at the Living Computer Museum in Seattle, which sadly is closed right now because of the coronavirus. And they made it even sound permanent. But I think you could still get an account. But you can log on to this mainframe and program in 1960s Fortran. And I've done it.
I couldn't. My dad could have, but I couldn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm constantly on the lookout, and I've got plenty of things. Until recently, this was the only working telephone in our house, and you could dial the Kremlin.
Wow, but it doesn't hang on the wall, and it's not a party line.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is the 1960s. Now you could have a dial phone in one room and a princess phone in another room. I mean, this is high technology. We'll have Visiphones by next year.
So what's the technology you're most looking forward to in the next couple of years? What do people forget we didn't have 55 years ago?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, we're still in the time of fountain pens and blotter paper, and computers simply don't exist in the home. Push button phones have just come out, but they're brand new and you hardly see them. There's so much I'm looking forward to. I will tell you the thing I am looking forward to the most, and it's vaguely technological. In February of 1965, so this year for me, there was a pilot for a show by Gene Roddenberry about a ship that went to the stars. And it was not bought because the plot was too cerebral and it was too expensive. But they commissioned a second pilot, which I understand is going to be filming this summer. So I have to tell you, I have been looking forward since 1954 to September 1966 when I get to cover Star Trek week by week as it comes out. We've already gotten to do a little bit of that. So we covered all of the Twilight Zone. We covered The Outer Limits. We're right in the middle of the first Doctor of Doctor Who, and we've got a great writer in England who she writes the most hilarious summaries of the episodes. But I'm most looking forward to Star Trek next year, which at this point I could actually say this may be something I could see.
But, Star Trek's always been part of my life. I can't imagine the science fiction community or part of my life not having Star Trek and Doctor Who and all of these things. So it's interesting that right now you're living in a time when those things haven't happened yet.
And it's rapidly changing. I just got a record somewhere around here. I just got here it is. So this record just came out. This is We Five's On My Mind. You Were On My Mind. And you listen to it and you're like, hey, this sounds like the 60s. And most everything before it doesn't sound like the 60s. It sounds
Mhm.
like either the 50s or that weird surf guitar interlude.
Mhm.
And just 1965 is such a rapidly changing time. In a week, Gemini 4 is going to go up, and the first American spacewalk is going to happen. And while that
Mm.
happens, I've actually assembled an all-star professional space historian panel. We're going to discuss it on the Journey Show next week.
That's cool.
So all this exciting stuff is happening, and we get to cover it, and we get to live through it. It's so much fun.
That sounds amazing. And you figure you're only 2 years away from the Summer of Love and all of these huge changes. So one of the things I notice you do cover on the on the website is what's going on politically. Like you're talking about the Australian troops, and that are in Borneo, and how do you decide how much of that to cover?
Well, I read the newspaper every day. I mean, if I only reported the headlines, then it would be nothing but Vietnam and the Dominican Republic for the next several months.
Yeah.
So, and I try to break it up. I try to cover things that are not necessarily what everyone's looking at, and I also try to cover things that were really big back then, but have fallen off the radar 55 years later. It's like, oh, we were in the Dominican Republic. There was a crisis in Laos. We were worried about Sukarno when he left the UN because he didn't like Malaysia being in the UN. There was an editorial in Life magazine this week talking about how, the Cold War is essentially over. Eastern Europe is breaking free of the Soviet yoke. Germany's about to reunite.
Mm-hmm.
So we really had no idea what was coming next. And I tried it as cognizant as I am of history.
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep myself unspoiled. So I don't even know who's going to win the Hugo this year. I certainly don't know who's on the ballot next year. And
it's interesting, and I find it really helps put the reviews and things into context because it shows you what the writers were living through,
right.
Which sometimes we forget that the writers 55 years ago didn't have our reality and they didn't have our knowledge.
Right. That said, though, for months and months I was in this slump because I was reading nothing but dudes writing about worlds that was all dudes, and there were no women, and any women that were there were objects. And I was like, was this just the air they breathed back then? Was everyone like this? Am I maybe being too critical? Is my mind too anachronistic that I'm being bothered by this? And then every once in a while I would get a story like by James Schmitz or Zena Henderson, and it would be clear, no, not everyone bought into this crap.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I've gone through stuff now that you get where you go through 2 or 3 or 4 books in a row, and it's dudes living in worlds where it's all dudes and women are objectified, and you're like, please give me something great. Give me a Priory of the Orange Tree. Give me something that I can just sink my teeth into that's not this. But there was obviously a customer base for it then, and there's obviously people who want to read it now. I find it not. It doesn't do any of the interesting things that science fiction can do. It's not hopeful to me. It's not forward-looking. It's not inclusive. It's not all the things that I love in my science fiction. And from the stories that you're publishing, the things that you obviously love in science fiction too.
Right.
So one of the other things that you mentioned along with women authors is LGBTQ authors. Can you talk a little bit about the history of LGBTQ, because we're seeing LGBTQ characters starting to show up in the 50s, aren't we?
Yes, but it's very, very subtle. So it's good we talk about this because it's actually Pride Month now.
Mm-hmm. I'm aware of that, yeah.
but we're pre-Stonewall, right? In 1965, it's still, again, you could be arrested for being gay. There were cops in skinny jeans and plain clothes hoping to be picked up by gay guys so they could then arrest them. This was life in California in 1965. There were gay, or at least queer, science fiction authors, and I don't know that they were exactly out, but I don't know it was a secret. So Arthur C. Clarke, Joanna Russ, those are the ones I know of, for instance. There could be plenty more that we wouldn't know of. The guy who wrote the Hornblower series, he was frustrated that he couldn't write what he wanted to write, which was the gay romance, because he was gay. And so his stories have lots of great manliness that you have the right glasses on, you can totally see it. There are a couple of stories. Ted Sturgeon had one in 52. And I think it's Evelyn Smith had one in 63 called They Also Serve. And that one's amazing because in that one, you have two characters who are not explicitly gay. They never say these are homosexuals, but they are two Navy personnel who have a problem. They're clearly in a man and wife situation on this alien planet where they're there for years. And what's really interesting is the homosexuality is not played negatively. In fact, it's the fact that they're gay that leads them to do the first successful contact with aliens that are living on that planet. In I Want the Stars, there is a lesbian relationship, strong suggestion of polyamory. One of my very favorite examples is there's the 1959 film with Mel Ferrer, Harry Belafonte, and Inger Stevens called The World of Flesh and the Devil. It's an after the bomb story. And that one, not only does it have an interracial relationship, and they explicitly talk about why the interracial issue is a problem, or why others would see it as a problem, but there are no others anymore. But after Mel Ferrer shows up and we have a fight to the death between Harry Belafonte and Mel Ferrer, and then Harry Belafonte on the steps of the UN building in front of the "Beat Your Swords into Plowshares" motto throws down his rifle. And then Inger Stevens takes Harry Belafonte's hand, and then she takes Mel Ferrer's hand, and the three of them walk off into a clearly implied polyamorous sunset. In 1959, in 1960, you have Tony Curtis in the hot tub in Spartacus, right? And tastes that include both snails and oysters. Yeah, people were gay back then too, but you had to be careful.
And one of the other authors we talked about when we chatted before was Marion Zimmer Bradley, and she had started writing, and she's got some other issues, but she had started writing, her Darkover series and having characters of indeterminate gender and all of these things. So there's all sorts of interesting things for people to discover back in these stories that make them great stories.
That's it. I do have to give my caveat that Galactic Journey has a policy since 1964 of not reviewing Marion Zimmer Bradley. And that's not some sort of anachronistic after the fact discovery of her crimes that came to light after she died. In 1964, we knew there were problems. And she was married. She had just gotten married to Walter Breen, who was banned from the World Convention of that year because he couldn't keep his hands off little boys. And this was a civil war that went through science fiction back then, which was every bit as big as the puppy scandal, which went through science fiction a few years ago. So we don't do Marion Zimmer Bradley. I'm sorry to people who grew up with her and love her.
Yeah, it's for me, it's how many people's careers she influenced and helped launch. But you have to respect Galactic Journey's stand. I think it's the stand that we would have taken in 1964 had we known. We hope. That's the thing. We knew in 1964. It was not. I didn't. I wasn't born. But
well, yeah, and I think there was sort of a circle the wagons, right? Back in 1964. The science fiction fandom community was actually very small. Worldcon membership was in the hundreds, and it cost $2 for a ticket. And there was this idea. I mean, and information was not perfect back then. So there were a bunch of people who said, "Look, we're weirdos. They're weirdos. Can't we all be in the weirdo tent together?" And the answer is, not if I have a young child and Walter Breen's in the tent with them.
There's certain places that aren't. The weirdo tent doesn't welcome in everyone it can. So
right.
So what haven't we covered that you're excited to talk about from Galactic Journeys or that time frame?
Gosh, I could talk about all these things forever. We are running
And
up
I
on
highly encourage anyone who has not been following Galactic Journey. You will never be disappointed with the time that you spend going and taking a look at it. It's fascinating, and you will learn things every time.
I think the biggest thing is all of these rediscovered classics can inform our stuff today. The things we found pleasure in back then. I think you hit it on the head with Keetra. I've tried to capture what it was like to read a 20th century juvenile, but it's updated for the 21st century. Keetra could not be a queer person of color protagonist in 1965, but she can be in 2020 and should be. So I think we can find things that are great in the past and let them inform what we do today. I think we can look back in the past and find inspiration. You know, I think we're used to seeing that history is sort of this long, progressive movement. And look how far we've come. But I look back in 1965, we just had the Voting Rights Act passed. We're going to have the poll tax is going to be revoked. Civil Rights Act, all these amazing things that happened. Medicare, Intelsat, the space race, Help for Appalachia, Head Start. There are all these amazing progressive programs that we take for granted today. And now they're being eroded and outright fought against as reactionary forces try to undo stuff that was taken as read 55 years ago. The essential humanity of half of America, more than half of America. So I think it's important to look at the past and see the future and to see today, because I don't think you can appreciate where you are unless you see where you've been.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Gideon, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and with us. Again, I will encourage anyone who wants to support Gideon, go to galacticjourneys.org, buy his books. They're fantastic. I'm looking forward to the next Keetra book. Now that I know about the high fantasy, I'm looking forward to that one as well. Do you have any final things that you'd like to chat about before we sign off?
Yeah, I want to talk about bookstores real quick. When we started Journey Press, we made a conscious decision to prioritize bookstores in our distribution strategy. And it was definitely the harder path. It meant calling up bookstores one by one and establishing personal connections. But that's how I met great people like you and discovered places like Rediscovered Books. And I've never regretted it for a second. And right now we're sort of in this crisis, this existential crisis, right? Can physical locations survive? And what I've been finding, polling all my bookstores in my network, is that yes, the community comes out for bookstores. Bookstores provide a service that you just can't get online or impersonally. And they can refer ebooks too. Now bookstores have online storefronts. Our books are available in ebook form. And we like them when people get them through Kobo. So all I got to say is thank you, Bruce, for hosting us. Thank you for being around and being a literary hub for Idaho. And thank you for making this whole press worthwhile. If people like you didn't exist, I don't think I would do it.
You know, it's what I love to do. We talk to people about books all day. It's the thing that you get in that physical location, is that possibility of the interaction that online just doesn't give you. So thank you so much, Gideon. We really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to continuing our relationship with your press and continuing to see what goes on 55 years ago as you report it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you. Bye. Can I hit that?